Alright, welcome to another episode in the C++ 2D game development series. This is episode number 6. The last episode that we did was the introduction to SDL and configuring it with Visual Studio 2019. If you don't have 2019, the procedure is generally the same and it should work with other versions, unless they do a drastic change that may change things. If that's the case, leave a comment in the section below. Let me know, and maybe I can do a video for an upgrade. This video, what we're going to be doing is initializing SDL with our program and creating a window that will pop up on the screen. So this is, if you've been following along, you should have this code in front of me so far. You should have a room class as well. We are going to take this and go further this episode. When it comes to graphics, since we're using the model view controller method, we want to keep everything segregated into its own. We want data where its data is going to be, we want the visual where the visual is going to be, and then a controller to control it. So with that being said, when we do the visuals, what we're going to want to do is create a separate class for the visuals and work off of there. What I suggest is creating a screen class. So to create one, what we do is we right click the source files and we add a class. What we're going to call it is we're going to call it the screen class. It will create the source file and it will create the H file as well. Let's go ahead and create that. Here we go. It opens up. It starts with the H file. In the H file, we have the constructor. In the constructor, this is where we will initialize the window. And there's some things that we're going to have to know. We're going to have to know how big the window is, where it's located on the screen. Alright, let's talk about properties. Properties in classes are private. The scope of them is that they cannot be accessed by the program creating the object, creating this class. So any property that we have in a class can only be done internally inside this class. So what we would have to do then is have a function that will get the property that is public, and that so whoever created the class or created the object will be able to access those public functions to get the internal properties that you want. And this is pretty standard. So let's start by creating a couple properties for the size, or not for the size, for the width of the width and height of the screen itself. We need to know this stuff. Now we're going to use integers because pixels are whole numbers, and you are going to have a screen that is going to be, let's say, 800 pixels wide and by 600 pixels in height. You cannot have half pixels. You can only have whole pixels. So we use integers for this. And so let's create a couple, a height and a width integer. Naming convention, you can name it whatever you want to name it. We're going to name it the width and the height. However, I'm going to put a little underscore ahead of the actual name to signify that these are private variables. Some people put the underscore at the trailing end. Some people put the letter M to signify that it is a member of the class. What is right? What is wrong? It's tomato, tomato. There is a standard, but there are multiple standards. So either I would pick one and stick with it. My standard is the underscore prior to that. If you've heard of any other standards, uh, leave a comment in the comment down below. Let me know what other standards you've heard of. But for now, we're going to stick with the underscore below that. Um, Alright, so now that we have a couple properties for this class, we need to set the properties, and we do that with the constructor. The constructor is this one. It has no type prior to it, and it is just the name of the class that you made and a couple parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we want to get it, put in a couple variables in there. That's so when you create the object, it requires you to enter a couple variables. And in this case, we want an int for the height and an int for the width. Oops. All right. So this is how we're gonna. But why do we get a green, a little green squiggly? What did we do wrong? Well, we didn't do anything wrong. But there's two files. There's two files to a class. There's a class. There's the H file, and then there's the source file. The little green squiggly is showing that our source file doesn't match what our header file has. So let's click over to the source file. There we get a red squiggly. Well, the red squiggly is basically saying that it's not matching. There's no overload that that has this. So we need to add those two files. We need to have a height and we need to have a width. Once I click out of it, everything should be fine. So how do we set that? Well, for beginners, you would set it by saying your variable height is going to equal height, and your variable width is going to equal width. That's fine. That works. If you want to do it that way, go ahead. You can do it that way. That is a very beginner way to do things, to get familiar with it. But things have changed a little bit over time. The newer versions of C++ changed. We do not have to declare them in between these brackets. What we can do is we can click enter just after this to drop down. Let's tab over. Let's say our underscore height in brackets, give it height, use a comma, underscore width is width. Click out of it. It doesn't work. Oh, why? Because we forgot the colon. There we go. So this is how we do it. This is how we do constructors now. We have the variables attached inside the brackets. These are the ones that will be added when you create an object. You stick in these variables because you want to send it to the object. You put a colon afterwards. This signifies that we have some properties that we have to initialize. We list the property, and inside the brackets of the property, we put in what variable matches with that one. And we do it for both of our properties. Then we do the brackets afterwards. This is a very quick way of doing it, and very standard, so that you know at the top of your constructor you are initializing the properties right away. Now we got the constructor, we got the classes started. We forgot to do one thing. This is our graphics. This is going to be our graphics object. And what we need to do is we need to, in the header file, we need to include SDL in there. We need to do that. So now that we can use the SDL library within this section, and we can move on from here. So now that we have SDL, we can start initializing the SDL. Do we want to initialize the SDL inside the constructor? We can definitely do that. I'm going to go a different way about it, and I'm going to create an initialize function, initialize method. I'm going to stick it in the public so that I can access it from the parent function that called it, that created it. I'm going to stick it right in here, and I'm going to make it, normally you would make it a type void. Most methods you would make a type void. This method, I'm going to make it a type bool, so that it has to return a boolean. It has to return either a true or a false. And I'm going to call it initialize, and do that. Do I need to put anything in between the brackets? No, I do not need to put anything in between the brackets. I'm not passing the initialize function anything. I am just getting it to return stuff. I do this so that when I create the object, it creates the object, it sets the properties of the width and height. But when I want to initialize it, I call a separate function to initialize this SDL, so that I can pass back whether it was successful or not successful. We have another green squiggly, and that's because we haven't added it to our source file yet. So let's go ahead and add it to our source file. So adding methods to our source file, as you can see by these constructor and this deconstructor, it needs the screen class prior to it. So we always have to do that. However, this is a method, so we have to put the type of it first. So we're going to put bool, and then we'll put screen with 2 colons, and then we can choose initialize with the colons and brackets. Everything, you shouldn't get any squigglies then, everything should be working fine. Alright, so before we initialize it, how about we go back to the spot that creates the object, and that would be in our launcher, in our main function. The main function where we created the room, this is where we're going to create and initialize the screen. So first things first, we got to include the header file. So let's go ahead and include. Remember, the quotations is what we use, and we're going to call it screen.h. This is going to allow us to be able to use that header file and all those functions in it. Underneath well, let's do it above it, since the screen is something that we should be creating first. Let's initialize the screen, because if the screen doesn't get initialized, then there's no point in initializing everything else, because we need the visual. So let's initialize the screen. We're going to do it as a pointer as well, so let's put the star, and let's call it screen. That's a good name for it. It is our screen. It will be our window. We could call it window, but we'll call it screen for this instance. Let's do that. Everything worked out fine. So above the room down here, let us create it here. So let's put screen equals new screen, and this is where we have to add those integers. So let's make it 800 by 600. Alright, everything worked out fine. There's an extra space here that I'm just going to fix up right now. Alright, so we're going to have a width of 800 and a height of 600. Does anybody see what we've done wrong so far? I do. If we go back to our screen header, we did height versus width. We should switch this around. We should make this width and make this height. Whoops. And make that height. And we'll have to do the same thing for the source file. Width and height. Height. Everything else can stay the same because it doesn't care what order it is in, it just initializes. Alright, so if that is working correctly, if we were to run it right now, Control F5, we should get no problems running the program, except there was an error. No. Of course, you probably already saw that happening. Our initialize function is not returning anything. Well, let's return it. Return false. Return false because by default it should return false. By default it shouldn't allow anything past this function if we call it. We haven't called it yet, but that's fine. Let's Control F5 now and see if it will run. Control F5 is the shorthand to running it. And voila, everything still ran as normal. This is a room because it ran our room function. Everything's great. Alright, so what's the next step? The next step is moving further in the initialize function. This is where we're going to start initializing the SDL function. So let's move on down here. So let's give us some space. In here there is the first function that we need to call, and that is SDL init. That will be what initializes the SDL. So let's try that first of all. It is in SDL underscore init, right? And then open bracket, because it is a function, we are calling it a function, and then it wants something to add to that. So what are we going to add to that? We need to add the SDL init video, right? That's all we want. Semicolon at the end. Everything should work out fine, but it doesn't. And why doesn't it? It doesn't because we never included the SDL in this file, which we need to. And yes, you said, yeah, we included the SDL in the screen header file. Well, sometimes you need to include it within the source file as well because you use a lot of the library. So if we do that, everything will be fine. Let's click off here. See, I used the quotations, but it's in our library folder, so we need to use the open brackets. And give it a second, and everything should populate as well if I spelled this correctly. Everything needs to be spelled correctly. And there we go, the red. So this is the statement that the function that initializes SDL. Well, if you look in the SDL wiki, here's the function right here, SDL init. Let's click on that to get a better understanding. We can see that it returns an int, And why does it return an int? Because it returns 0 on success or negative air quote on failure, right? So if it returns an int on, if it returns a 0 on success or a negative on a failure, let us change this around a bit. We are going to go if, let's open the brackets, if that equals 0, then we can take that out. Let's return true, right? That works. If it returns 0, it's going to return true. How can we tell? How can we tell? Well, we can put a statement in here where we can exit it out. So let's put our standard cout SDL initialized standard and line. There we go. What is cout? It needs to know that. We need another include in here. We need include IO stream. Everything should work. Now it knows it. So let's take this line, copy it, and return it down here to be SDL not initialized. Alright. Well, we need to call this function from our main function, so let's go do that. Let's go and from in here, let's under here, let's go screen dot initialize, open and close brackets. There we go. Perfect. Let's run this. Control F5 and SDL initialized. This is a room. Voila, it worked. All right. We're going to do one more thing because I do not like the way that this is right here. I would rather, if SDL didn't initialize, it would return a false right away. And if it did initialize, then it would return true. So let's take this line here. We'll take this and we'll add it to the bottom. And we'll take this one and we'll put it in here. And then instead of it equaling 0, if it doesn't equal 0, so by now we switched it. I remember said yes, we should default it by having it return a false. But now that we look at the instructions of how everything gets initialized, we can initialize SDL from the beginning and if it doesn't initialize, that's when it returns false right away. So everything after that if statement doesn't get executed, it just exits, it just returns a false right away. If it does get initialized, then it moves out of that if statement and it goes down to the next block of statements that we will have. And that will be for the next video. And then if it makes it all the way to the bottom, this is where it will return true that it did initialize. So let's go back to our launcher. We called it here. That means it's going to return something. So in this statement here, what if we put an if statement? If screen.initialize if screen.initialize is not equal to false, if it is not equal to, if it's not equal to true, then return 1. Remember this return 0? Remember that return 0 for when you execute when you run your program, and then the command prompt says this program has been executed with a 0. Then it returns this 0. Well, now if we run our program and it returns a 1, then we know that the screen did not get initialized, and we return 1, it shuts down the program right then and there, which is what we want. So, should we run it? See if it did it again? Alright, Control F5, we will run. Let's see what it comes up with. SDL initialize, this is a room exited with a code 0. If it would have displayed SDL not initialized, it wouldn't have ran this code. It wouldn't have said this is the room, but it would have just said exited with a code 1. And that's the first step to initializing. That is the first step to initializing SDL. Next video, we are going to get into creating a window. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you stick around. I know the videos, I'm trying to put out the videos weekly. It's just the end of the year right now, and my day job has been taking up most of my free time. So hopefully in the new year, or I will say in the new year, the videos will start being out on a weekly basis. But if you are just joining in now, then there are a whole bunch of videos for you to watch now. And if this is an old video that you're clicking on, then I assume that there's a whole bunch of videos after this. And just hit that like button. Thank you. Have a good day.